United States.
Lexington. Moore's Law. Alabama's Senate primary drives a wedge between Donald Trump and his closest supporters.
The first time Roy Moore lost an election for a seat on the Alabama circuit bench, he quit the law to become a professional kickboxer. Now, stumping for the Senate seat vacated by Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, the former Chief Justice of Alabama is limbering up for a more ambitious fight. "Put on the whole armour of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil," he tells a crowd in Huntsville, northern Alabama, in the words of the Apostle Paul. "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers of the darkness of this world." This takes Republican dissatisfaction with Mitch McConnell to a new level. The party's leader in the Senate is hated by Mr. Moore for having put his wiles, and millions of dollars from conservative donors, behind his rival for the Republican Senate ticket, Luther Strange. It is easy to see why. Mr. Strange, who is keeping the Senate seat warm at the behest of Alabama's former governor, Robert Bentley, is a former lobbyist with a reputation for flexibility. Mr. Moore is a religious zealot, with little grasp of secular issues besides his trademark eagerness to be uncompromising. A supporter of Donald Trump, who won a huge majority in Alabama last year, Mr. Moore duly rails against illegal immigration, though in a recent interview he failed to recognize the name of Barack Obama's biggest immigration reform, the recently condemned Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Also prone to making racially insensitive and Islamophobic remarks, he makes the reactionary Mr. Sessions seem moderate. He is the favourite to win the primary vote, which will be held on September 26th, ahead of an election in December. As one of the first Senate races to be held since Mr. Trump's election, the contest is attracting a lot of attention. It illustrates the widening gulf between Republican leaders and foot soldiers, which Mr. Trump exploited in his populist campaign. It indicates, too, the dilemma this has presented the president with, now that he needs the support of both sides. The base for validation and votes, the leaders to govern. It is also a test of the president's authority because, to the dismay of the Moore camp and his own populist advisers, he has endorsed Mr. Strange. Even so, Mr. Moore's rise is mainly illustrative of two local quirks: Alabamans' unusual evangelical fervour and how badly they have been served by one-party Republican rule. A theocrat who believes his interpretation of Scripture takes precedence over any court or law, Mr. Moore is known for his several losing clashes with federal authority. Thus his refusal, as a circuit judge and then as Alabama's Chief Justice, to remove the inscriptions of the 10 Commandments he placed in his courthouses, even after federal judges found them to contravene the First Amendment. He was sacked as a result. Then, after he returned as Chief Justice, again removed for having ordered Alabama's judges to ignore a Supreme Court ruling legalizing gay marriage. In a state where almost a third of the population is white, evangelical, and conservative, these rows have given him the support of around 150,000 voters, roughly his tally in a preliminary round of the primary, in which he bested 9 other candidates. Normally, that would not be enough to win the Senate ticket, and Mr. Moore's peculiarities make it hard for him to expand his appeal. He is assisted by 2 other recent scandals: the conviction for corruption of the Republican Speaker of Alabama's State House, and a sex scandal that did for the former Republican governor. This has left Alabaman conservatives even more fed up with politicians than they were before, depressing turnout, which helps Mr. Moore. It has probably also won him new voters on the basis that he is, even if a bit wacko, a man of principle. By aping Mr. Trump, Mr. Moore is meanwhile trying to cast his net wider. He presents himself as a reluctant politician for whom the pursuit of power is a sacrifice. He has not discouraged the racists for whom his perorations on antebellum America are appealing. "Show me the place in the Bible where slavery is condemned," one rally-goer said triumphantly. He also displays Mr. Trump's pantomime contempt for journalists, apparently in earnest. After his speech, Lexington approached and asked Mr. Moore to name 3 policies he hoped to pursue in Washington, D.C. In response, he leaned menacingly forwards, growled, "Get out of my face," and had your columnist ejected from the rally. The fact that Mr. Trump has not returned the compliment is awkward for Mr. Moore. His team suggests the President was suckered into making a bad call by Mr. McConnell, but Mr. Trump's endorsement of Mr. Strange, which he announced at a time when he and Mr. McConnell were barely speaking, is merely the latest evidence of a growing preference for pragmatic functionaries over the populist ideologues who helped get him elected, including Stephen Bannon, Mr. Trump's former chief strategist. "Big Luther," tweeted the President, in announcing his intention to stump for Mr. Strange in Huntsville, "gets things done." Mr. Moore, by contrast, says a fellow Alabaman evangelical would be marginalised in the Senate like Lucifer avoids the cross. The ideologues are not taking this lying down, with Mr. Bannon, the right-wing nationalist Breitbart news outfit that he runs, and other populist outfits backing Mr. Moore. Victory for the theocrat would be a fillip for them, perhaps leading to a string of primary challenges to sitting Republicans next year. Even so, it is hard to see this as a battle for the soul of the Republican Party, for that might imply an impending renewal. Whoever wins the primary, Mr. Moore or Mr. Strange, will have won a bad-tempered contest in which both candidates offered a list of Trumpian pledges to curb immigration, cut spending, and so forth that already seem unachievable. That will not inspire Alabama's demoralised conservatives, even if, the exigencies of tribalism suggest, they will probably send their candidate to the Senate anyhow.